When most Resident Evil fans think of the series' greatest villains, the same names always come to mind: Umbrella, Albert Wesker, or maybe even Mother Miranda. But hidden behind nearly every major biohazard over the last 3 decades is another organization, one so secretive that even after multiple games, files, and official reports, we still know almost nothing about them. They're simply known as the Connections. At first glance, they seem like just another criminal syndicate introduced in Resident Evil 7. But the deeper you dig into the lore, the stranger their story becomes. And according to the newest revelations in the Resident Evil timeline, their influence stretches even further than anyone imagined. So who exactly are the Connections? Who founded them? What do they actually want? And how did an organization hiding in the shadows become one of the most powerful forces in the entire Resident Evil universe? Today, we're uncovering the complete story of Resident Evil's most mysterious organization. For an organization that has shaped some of Resident Evil's biggest events, the Connections have surprisingly little recorded history. No one knows exactly when they were founded, and no one knows who created them. Even today, the identities of the people truly leading the organization remain a mystery. What investigators have uncovered is that the Connections had already established deep roots within the international criminal underworld long before most people had ever heard their name. According to later FBI investigations, the syndicate had been operating since at least before the 1980s, quietly building influence across governments, corporations, and organized crime while avoiding the attention that ultimately brought down organizations like Umbrella. Unlike Umbrella, the Connections never sought recognition. They preferred to work through intermediaries, shell organizations, political allies, and even corporate partners. If one operation failed, another could continue without anyone tracing it back to them. The first concrete evidence of their existence appeared in 1986. At the time, Umbrella Corporation was rapidly expanding its influence across the globe, with its founders racing to unlock the secrets of the progenitor virus. Rather than confronting Umbrella directly, the Connections chose a far more effective approach. Instead, they quietly inserted themselves into Umbrella's inner circle. Using a front organization known as the F Foundation, they established contact with Dr. James Marcus, one of Umbrella's 3 founders, even providing him with a $30 million donation. On the surface, it appeared to be financial support, but in reality, it was the beginning of a relationship that would allow the Connections to quietly infiltrate one of the most powerful pharmaceutical companies in the world. And when Marcus was murdered 2 years later, that relationship didn't end. Instead, another Umbrella researcher stepped forward to continue the correspondence, a man named Brandon Bailey. Without anyone realizing it, the Connections had just gained another doorway into Umbrella, and over the years that followed, that doorway would become one of the greatest intelligence operations in Resident Evil history. As the years passed, Umbrella continued expanding into the largest pharmaceutical company in the world. To the public, it was a corporation on the cutting edge of medical research, but behind closed doors, it was becoming the center of the world's most dangerous bioweapons program. And all the while, the Connections were watching. Following James Marcus's death in 1988, Brandon Bailey continued communicating with the syndicate, allowing their relationship with Umbrella to survive even after one of its founders was gone. But Bailey wasn't their only source. Over the following years, the Connections quietly planted moles throughout Umbrella, steadily collecting research, internal reports, and classified information from inside the company itself. Every new virus, every experiment, and every breakthrough, the Connections wanted to know about it. Unlike Umbrella, however, they had no interest in building massive laboratories or placing their name on front of the corporation. Knowledge was their greatest weapon. The more info they gathered, the less they needed to risk themselves. Then, sometime during the mid-1990s, their spies uncovered something that immediately became the organization's highest priority: a secret project hidden beneath Raccoon City, known only by a single name as Elpis. Very little info had leaked from Oswald E. Spencer's inner circle, only that Elpis possessed the potential to completely reshape the balance of military power across the world. To the connections, that could only mean one thing: Spencer had created the ultimate bioweapon. And from that moment on, recovering Elpis became one of the Syndicate's greatest ambitions. But the problem was that it was locked beneath Umbrella's most heavily protected city, and there was no way to reach it, at least not until disaster struck. For years, the Connections had waited patiently, watching Umbrella expand, stealing its research, preparing for the moment the corporation finally stumbled. And then, an opportunity arrived in September of 1998. Once the T-Virus escaped into Raccoon City, Umbrella's worst nightmare had become reality. To most people, the outbreak was a catastrophe. To the Connections, it was an opportunity. While the world focused on containing the infection, the Syndicate immediately shifted its attention toward a single objective: the underground research complex beneath Raccoon City known as ARC. Hidden below the city, ARC housed Spencer's mysterious Elpis project, the same research the Connections had spent years trying to uncover. But gaining access wouldn't be easy. Even with the outbreak spreading through the streets above, Elpis remained locked behind security measures that only Oswald E. Spencer himself could bypass. But still, that wasn't enough to stop them. According to later investigations, the Connections moved quickly to secure ARC while simultaneously using their political influence to push for the destruction of Raccoon City itself. And when the missile finally struck on October 1st, the world believed it had been launched simply to contain the outbreak. But behind the scenes, the Connections had achieved exactly what they wanted. The city was erased, evidence disappeared beneath the rubble, and Raccoon City was sealed off from the outside world. With the ruins placed under lockdown, ARC became inaccessible to almost everyone else, but not to the Connections. For the next 28 years, the Syndicate quietly used the underground complex as a base for researching, developing, and distributing bioweapons, all while continuing their search for Elpis. Ironically, the one thing they had spent years trying to obtain remained just out of reach, because without Spencer's password, even they couldn't unlock it. But Raccoon City wasn't the organization's only victory. The outbreak had done something even more valuable. It had finally begun the collapse of Umbrella itself, and the Connections intended to make sure the company never recovered. Although Raccoon City had been destroyed, Umbrella itself was still standing. The corporation had suffered its greatest disaster, but it wasn't finished. Not yet, at least. In the years that followed, governments around the world launched investigations into Umbrella's role in the outbreak. Lawsuits mounted, public trust collapsed, and pressure on the company continued to grow. From the outside, it appeared as though Umbrella was simply paying the price for its own crimes, but behind the scenes, the Connections were making sure it stayed that way. Using their extreme ties within the United States government and the powerful pharmaceutical conglomerate Tricell, the Syndicate quietly influenced the legal proceedings surrounding Umbrella's collapse. Every piece of evidence, every political decision, and every setback pushed Umbrella closer to bankruptcy. Then, in 2004, the inevitable finally happened. Unable to survive the growing financial and legal pressure, Umbrella Corporation collapsed. After decades as the world's most powerful pharmaceutical company, it was finally gone. For most people, Umbrella's bankruptcy marked the end of an era, but for the Connections, it marked the beginning of another. With Umbrella dismantled and Oswald E. Spencer forced into hiding, the Syndicate quietly moved to seize whatever remained. Research, resources, political influence, anything that could strengthen their own growing empire. And now, with one of their greatest competitors gone, the Syndicate could finally turn its attention towards something far more ambitious. Not improving the viruses Umbrella had created, but creating an entirely new kind of bioorganic weapon. One that wouldn't simply infect its victims, it would control them. By the early 1990s, the Connections had already inherited decades of stolen research from Umbrella, but they weren't interested in repeating Umbrella's mistakes. Creating stronger viruses was no longer enough. They wanted something revolutionary, something capable of changing the future of biological warfare forever. And their search eventually led them to a reclusive scientist living in a remote mountain village in Eastern Europe. A woman named Mother Miranda. For decades, Miranda had secretly studied a unique organism unlike anything the world had ever seen, the mold. Unlike traditional viruses, the mold possessed extraordinary properties. It could infect living organisms, alter their bodies, preserve memories, and create an interconnected consciousness between those it consumed. To Miranda, it represented the key to bringing back her long-dead daughter Eva. But to the Connections, it represented the future of warfare. Rather than stealing her work outright, the syndicate approached Miranda with an offer. They would provide the funding, technology, and resources she needed to continue her research. In return, Miranda would share samples of the mold and Eva's DNA. It was an agreement that benefited both sides. Miranda moved one step closer to resurrecting her daughter, while the Connections acquired one of the most valuable biological discoveries in Resident Evil history. Working alongside the HCF, the Syndicate immediately began experimenting with the mold, searching for a way to transform it into the perfect bioorganic weapon. Their objective wasn't simply to create another monster, it was far more ambitious than that. They wanted to create a weapon capable of controlling human minds, a BOW that can turn entire populations into obedient servants without firing a single shot. If they succeeded, conventional warfare itself could become obsolete. But creating such a weapon would prove far more difficult than anyone expected, because before they could perfect their vision, they would have to endure years of failure. Developing the perfect bioorganic weapon wasn't something the Connections accomplished overnight. For years, they experimented with the mold, producing one prototype after another in an attempt to create a weapon capable of complete psychological control. Each generation brought them closer. The earliest subjects, known as the A-type, suffered from severe performance issues and were ultimately deemed impractical. Meanwhile, the B, C, and D-type subjects each improved upon their predecessors, but none possessed the stability or capabilities the organization was searching for. Despite years of research, the perfect weapons still didn't exist. But then, sometime before 2014, everything changed. Working from a lab in Munich under Mother Miranda's supervision, the Connections completed the first successful E-type bioorganic weapon, designated E001, but she was better known by another name, Eveline. Unlike traditional bioweapons, Eveline wasn't designed to overwhelm armies through brute force. She was designed to control them. Using the unique properties of the mold, Eveline could infect those around her, manipulate their thoughts, alter their memories, and slowly bend them to her will until they viewed her as family. To anyone looking from the outside, it didn't resemble mind control, it resembled love. That's what made Eveline so terrifying. She didn't conquer people through fear, she convinced them they wanted to obey. To ensure she remained stable, the Connections developed specialized stabilizing compounds that slowed her rapid aging and prevented psychological deterioration. They also created a unique serum capable of resisting her mental influence, along with a specialized neurotoxin designed to eliminate E-type subjects if they ever became uncontrollable. For the first time in the organization's history, the Connections had achieved exactly what they had spent decades pursuing: a bioorganic weapon capable of replacing conventional warfare itself. Their plan was simple: sell Eveline to clients around the world, and allow governments, militaries, and terrorist organizations to quietly seize control of entire populations from within. If successful, the balance of global power would change forever. There was only one problem. The world's most dangerous bioorganic weapon was still a little girl, and no one, not even the Connections, could truly control what they had created. As the connections continued developing the E-Type project in secret, another event unfolded that hinted at just how deeply the syndicate had embedded itself within the world's governments. In 2013, President Adam Benford prepared to deliver a historic speech at Ivy University. His goal was simple: reveal the truth about the Raccoon City destruction incident. For years, the full story surrounding the city's destruction had remained buried beneath government secrecy, but Benford intended to finally declassify the info and bring it into the open. But he never got the chance. Before he could address the nation, Benford became the victim of a bioterrorist attack orchestrated by the secret society known as the Family, transforming him into a zombie and plunging Tall Oaks into chaos. Officially, the connections had no direct involvement in the attack. However, later investigations raised an unsettling possibility. Benford may have known about the connections' influence within the United States government, as well as their hidden role in the destruction of Raccoon City. If that was true, then his death silenced one of the few people who might have exposed the organization years before the world ever learned its name. Whether that was merely coincidence or something far more deliberate remains as one of Resident Evil's unanswered questions. By 2014, the connections had finally achieved what they had spent decades working toward. Eveline was complete, but now they needed to deliver her. Following a failed BSAA raid on one of their facilities in Munich, the organization decided it was no longer safe to keep Eveline in Europe, and instead, they arranged to secretly transport her to another lab in Central America, placing her aboard a large tanker known as the Annabelle. Assigned to escort her were two handlers, Alan Droney and Mia Winters. Their job seemed straightforward: monitor Eveline's condition, administer her stabilizing medication, and safely deliver the world's first successful E-Type bioorganic weapon to its new destination. But Eveline was never an ordinary child. She desperately wanted something her creators could never give her: a family. As the journey continued, Eveline's mental condition became increasingly unstable. Without the emotional attachment she constantly craved, her behavior grew more unpredictable, making it harder for Mia and Alan to keep her under control. And then, on October 5th, everything fell apart. Eveline finally lost control. The outbreak spread across the ship within moments, infecting nearly everyone on board through the mold. Chaos erupted as crew members turned against one another, while the massive tanker itself suffered catastrophic damage. The Annabelle was completely lost, but rather than sinking immediately, the crippled vessel drifted across the Gulf of Mexico before eventually washing ashore in the Louisiana Bayou. For most organizations, losing the world's most advanced bioorganic weapon would have been an unimaginable disaster. But surprisingly, the connections didn't immediately move to recover her. Instead, they made a decision that would have devastating consequences. They allowed Eveline to remain in Louisiana, quietly observing what happened next from the shadows. And to monitor the situation further, the organization established a hidden research facility inside the nearby salt mine and recruited an unlikely new operative, a member of the very family Eveline had already begun to infect, Lucas Baker. Without realizing it, the Baker family had become part of one of the connection's largest experiments. Rather than abandoning the Baker House incident, the connections turned it into a live experiment. Hidden beneath the Louisiana Bayou, their lab inside the salt mine remained fully operational, and from there, researchers closely monitored Eveline's behavior, gathering data on the mold and watching how her infection spread through the Baker family. Their most valuable asset inside the estate was Lucas Baker. Unlike the rest of the family, Lucas eventually freed himself from Eveline's direct mental control after the connections provided him with a specialized serum. But instead of escaping, he chose to work for them. Lucas maintained regular contact with the syndicate, reporting Eveline's condition while assisting with their research from inside the Baker estate. Together with the scientists stationed in the salt mine, he helped develop entirely new molded variants, giving the connections an opportunity to continue refining their biological weapons despite the disaster aboard the Annabelle. But then, another problem emerged. Without her stabilizing treatments, Eveline began aging at an alarming rate. The little girl the Connections had spent decades creating was rapidly losing control of both her body and mind. And when Lucas reported the situation to headquarters, the organization responded by sending everything needed to manufacture an E-type necrotoxin, the only weapon capable of permanently eliminating Eveline should she become impossible to contain. Ironically, the creators of the world's most advanced bioorganic weapon were now preparing to destroy their own creation. But before they could decide what to do next, someone else arrived at the Baker estate, a man with no military training, no experience fighting bioorganic weapons, and no idea what he was about to walk into. A man named Ethan Winters. His arrival would bring years of Connections research crashing down around them, and by the time the incident was over, the organization would lose far more than Eveline. By the summer of 2017, the Connections had suffered one of the greatest setbacks in their history. Eveline was dead, their hidden laboratory had been exposed, and Chris Redfield was forced to kill Lucas Baker, eliminating the organization's only known operative inside the Baker estate, and perhaps the BSAA's best chance of tracing the syndicate back to its leadership. For most organizations, that would have been the end, but for the Connections, it was simply another setback. Long before the Baker House incident had concluded, the syndicate had already begun watching someone else, Ethan Winters. Although Ethan survived Louisiana, he unknowingly left the incident forever changed. During his time at the Baker estate, he was at one point murdered by Jack Baker and eventually resurrected by the mold, resulting in his body becoming entirely composed of mold, perfectly replicating human DNA while granting him extraordinary regenerative abilities. Neither Ethan nor Mia fully understood what that meant, but the Connections did. And when the couple later had a daughter, Rosemary Winters, the organization immediately recognized that she was unlike any child who had come before her. Rose had inherited extraordinary properties from both of her parents, making her one of the most unique individuals ever connected to the mold. Rather than acting themselves, the Connections passed this info to someone they had worked with years earlier, Mother Miranda. For Miranda, Rosemary represented something she had spent more than a century searching for, a vessel capable of bringing her daughter Eva back to life. Armed with that knowledge, Miranda infiltrated the Winters family, abducted Rose, and set into motion the events of Resident Evil Village. Although Miranda carried out the kidnapping herself, it was the Connections who unknowingly handed her the opportunity. Once again, one decision made from the shadows had changed the course of Resident Evil history. But even after the Village incident came to an end, the Connections still hadn't given up on the goal they had been pursuing since the 1990s. Because beneath the ruins of Raccoon City, one final secret still remained locked away: Elpis. Long before Eveline, long before the Baker House incident, the Connections had been searching for something else, a project known only as Elpis. Ever since the mid-1990s, the Syndicate believed Oswald E. Spencer had hidden the ultimate bioweapon beneath Raccoon City, one capable of controlling minds on a global scale. That belief became the driving force behind decades of planning. It's why they infiltrated Umbrella, why they lobbied for the destruction of Raccoon City, and why they occupied the underground ARC facility for nearly 3 decades. Everything pointed toward Elpis. The only problem was that no one could access it. Spencer had sealed the project behind a password known only to himself, leaving even the Connections unable to unlock what they believed was the most valuable bioweapon ever created. Determined to finally claim it, the Syndicate assigned 2 trusted operatives to the mission, Zeno and a former Umbrella scientist named Victor Gideon. Following clues left behind in Spencer's research, the pair eventually traced the key to unlocking Elpis to an FBI agent named Grace Ashcroft, unknowingly dragging her into a conspiracy that had begun before she was even born. After years of searching, the Connections finally reached the underground ARC facility beneath Raccoon City. Everything they had sacrificed, every operation, every conspiracy, it had all led to this moment. Grace entered the password and the vault opened. At last, Elpis was finally theirs, or so they believed. Confident that they had finally obtained the ultimate weapon, Zeno immediately injected himself with Elpis, and within seconds, every enhancement in his body disappeared. The viruses that had empowered him for years were completely neutralized. In that instant, the connections realized the truth. Elpis had never been a mind-controlling virus. It had never been a bioweapon at all. It was an antiviral, a cure capable of neutralizing virus-based bioorganic weapons. For years, the connections had manipulated governments, destroyed Raccoon City, toppled Umbrella, and sacrificed countless lives, all while chasing something they had completely misunderstood. Their greatest obsession had never been a weapon. It was the one thing capable of destroying everything they had spent decades creating. The failure of the Elpis project should have been the end of the connections. It was a devastating blow. Victor Gideon was dead. Zeno was dead. Their plans for Elpis had collapsed. Yet, despite everything they had lost, the connections survived. In the aftermath of the incident, FBI agent Grace Ashcroft released a report exposing some of the organization's darkest secrets to the public. For the first time, evidence connected the connections to the Raccoon City missile strike, Umbrella's bankruptcy, their influence within the United States government, and their decades-long pursuit of Elpis. It was the most significant exposure the syndicate had ever faced. But even then, they didn't disappear. According to Grace's report, shortly after the Elpis incident, connection operatives returned to the ruins of Raccoon City once again. And after eliminating BSAA forces stationed within the quarantine zone, they recovered an unknown objective before vanishing back into the shadows. To this day, no one knows what they took. No one knows who gave the order, and perhaps most importantly, no one knows who was truly leading the connections. Because unlike Umbrella, Tricell, or any other organization, there was never a single mastermind whose death brought the organization to an end. The connections were built differently. They were designed to survive, to adapt, to remain hidden, and after everything that's happened throughout Resident Evil's history, they've done exactly that. Which leaves one unsettling question. If the connections have survived every major incident in the series, then what are they planning next?